The story of Britney Spears, it's so much more than just a pop star's career. It's a case that really forced a massive global conversation about fame, mental health, and that incredibly fine line between protecting someone and controlling them. For 13 years, she lived under a legal arrangement that sparked a movement and raised some really profound questions. So what was it? Was it a necessary shield? Or was it a gilded cage? Let's get into it. So here's how we're going to break this whole thing down. First, we'll look back at the initial crisis and the response that kicked this all off. Then, we'll dig into why so many people started calling it a gilded cage. After that, we'll explore the public reckoning, why it lasted for so long. And finally, we'll talk about the freedom and its fallout since the conservatorship ended. Okay, so to really understand why this conservatorship was even put in place, we have to rewind to late 2007, early 2008. From one point of view, this wasn't about money or control. It was about a family in a desperate situation, trying to save their daughter from what looked like a very public and honestly a very dangerous downward spiral. And when you look at this timeline, what's just shocking is how fast it all unraveled. The pressure on her must have been immense. I mean, in the span of about a year, Britney goes through a nasty custody battle, she has that head-shaving incident that was everywhere, and then that VMA performance that everyone talked about. It all just came to a head January 2008 when she locked herself in a bathroom with her son, leading to a police standoff. She was wheeled out on a gurney. For her family, that was it. That was the breaking point. A huge intervention felt like the only choice they had left. So her father goes to court and petitions for this, a conservatorship. And it is so important to understand what this actually means, especially in California. We're not talking about a casual arrangement here. This is a really severe legal step. It's usually reserved for people who a court decides can't provide for their own basic needs, like food, clothing, or a roof over their head. The fact that the court granted this, even for a temporary period, tells you just how serious and dire they thought the situation was. And it wasn't just about her personal state of mind. This chart really shows the financial chaos that was going on. In 2002, at her peak, Britney was worth over $60 million. By 2008, that number had plummeted by more than $20 million. That's a huge drop, fueled by erratic spending and some pretty questionable management. So from this perspective, the conservatorship wasn't just about saving Britney the person, it was about saving the entire financial empire she'd built. But was that the whole story? All right, let's flip the coin and look at the other side of this. Because what one side called protection, another came to see as a really profitable prison. The argument here is that what started as a temporary crisis plan slowly morphed into a long-term system of exploitation. This quote, wow, it's a really powerful glimpse into her perspective. It actually comes from one of her own court-appointed lawyers at the time. So while the public story was all about her recovery and getting stable, Britney herself was privately saying her life felt like being in jail. This doesn't sound like someone who's grateful for being saved. It sounds like someone who feels completely and utterly trapped. And this slide right here, this gets to the central paradox of the whole thing. Just think about it. How can a person be legally judged too incompetent to pick her own lawyer or make her own medical decisions, but at the same time be competent enough to release 4 albums, headline massive world tours, and pull in almost $500,000 a night in Las Vegas? That's the key question, right? If she was well enough to work at that insane level, why wasn't she well enough to control her own life? This number really says it all, $120 million. And that's just the gross revenue from her first Vegas residency. An incredible fortune was being made by a woman who legally couldn't even control her own credit card. It just raises that fundamental question. When the person earning all the money can't even touch it, who is this system really protecting? So we've got these two powerful, totally competing stories. And that brings us to the next big question. If there were so many red flags and contradictions, how on earth did this arrangement last for over a decade with almost no one in the mainstream questioning it? Well, there were a few key things that let this go on for so long. First, the media often treated her struggles less like a human crisis and more like public entertainment. Then there was the powerful stigma around mental health, which made the whole troubled star narrative really easy for people to just accept. Third, the legal system got tangled up in it all, with a judge even pointing to how complicated her finances were as a reason to keep the control in place. And then finally, everything changed with the rise of the #FreeBritney movement. This was a grassroots effort from fans who just refused to buy the official story, and they forced everyone to take a second look at the whole case. So, the conservatorship was officially terminated in late 2021.
But that wasn't the end of the story, not by a long shot. In fact, it just opened up the final and maybe most complicated chapter in this whole debate. How are we supposed to interpret Britney's life and her behavior now that she's finally free? And here we go again. We see two completely different ways of looking at it. On one hand, you have people looking at her unfiltered social media, the public fights with her family, and some of her behavior, and they see it as proof that the original worries about her stability were right all along. But then, the other side argues, well, isn't this exactly what you would expect from someone who was silenced for 13 years? They don't see instability, they see the raw, messy, but totally necessary sound of someone finally reclaiming their own voice.
At the end of the day, this whole saga leaves us with this one big question. We all have an idea of what control looks like, but when that control is suddenly lifted after more than a decade, what does freedom actually look like? Is it supposed to be neat and tidy, or is it messy, complicated, and deeply, deeply personal? Britney's story suggests it's probably the latter, and it forces all of us to maybe rethink what we expect from people who are just starting to heal from long-term trauma.